Have you ever wondered who invented sign language? Where did it start? Today, I'm going to answer your questions about the origins of sign language. If you have any questions, comment below. So, first question, did one person invent and develop a sign language, or is it developed on its own? That's a good question. So I'm going to ask you a question back. Who invented English? Wait, let's try another one. Who invented Spanish? Yeah, you're right. No one did. No one person invents a language. A language is developed when people associate with each other and over many years, over much time. So for example, deaf sign languages are developed in deaf communities. What's the earliest known sign language in history? Okay, so in essence, your question was, what was the first sign language ever? If we look back in history and we try to find the first sign language ever, we can't. We don't know. There's no record of it. But we do know that sign languages have existed probably since the beginning of time. But the first time it was put down in records was probably about the 3rd or 4th century BC, when this guy, Socrates, wrote about deaf people signing and gesturing. Suppose that we had no voice or tongue and wanted to communicate with one another. Should we not, like the deaf and dumb, make signs with the hands and head and the rest of the body? Also, in the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe, we have a few different records of sign languages. First was in Britain, Old Kentish Sign Language. A man named Samuel Pepys, he wrote down about a time that he visited a man named Downing. He had a deaf servant, and the two of them had this conversation about the Great Fire of London, and that happened in the year 1666. And there comes in the dumb boy that I know in Oliver's time, who is mightily acquainted here and with Downing, and he made strange signs of the fire of London, and how the king was abroad, and many things they understood, but I could not, which one I wondering at and discoursing with Downing about it. Why, says he, it is only a little use, and you will understand him, and make him understand you with as much ease as may be. Also, I remember the first time I read through African oral histories that someone has now transcribed. But I was reading through them and I found so many references to deaf. Why? Many had deaf servants. They didn't want their servants to be able to overhear confidential conversations. So that's mentioned over and over and over, deaf servants. Super fascinating. Did deaf people have ways to communicate before formal sign languages existed? So the question is, how did deaf people communicate before formal sign languages were established? Well, it depends. It depends what you mean by formal. So if formal means recognized, as in officially recognized, that's really a recent occurrence. Only recently have countries finally recognized sign languages. Before that, there were many popular, well-used sign languages, but the recognition came much later. Can deaf people communicate before a formal sign language is established? Absolutely, yes. Typically, it's called home sign if it's just one family that kind of comes up signs with some signs to communicate. Now, home sign is not a full complex language. Typically, it has a limited vocabulary, it's a limited system, but they have the ability to do basic communication. If there's a lot of people that are associating, that home sign becomes a village sign language. And that's more formalized. So typically, it's not just deaf people that will sign in a deaf village, but hearing people will sign too, because there's a high incidence of hereditary deafness there. Who were some key figures in developing sign languages? So the question, who were the most important people in the development of sign languages, is limited, because I think it's important to recognize that no one person developed a sign language, right? But historical records show that there are some people that have been involved in that process. So typically it's for deaf education and teaching deaf students. So for example, Abbé Charles Michael L'Épée, he established the first deaf school in France. Laurent Clark, he took French Sign Language from France and brought it to the United States. Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet, with Laurent Clark, set up the first deaf school here in the United States. And that's why ASL is heavily related to French Sign Language. But I will say it also includes some signs from Plains Indian Sign Language. It also includes some influence from Martha's Vineyard, the island sign language, and also French Sign Language is included as well. But that is ASL's journey. As far as other sign languages, there's either no records or very, very limited records of how it was developed, which is sad. What role did deaf communities play in creating sign languages? So this is a really important question. What role did the deaf community have on the development of sign languages? Well, let's back up. Role. Really, deaf people themselves develop sign language. When deaf congregate and interact, that's when sign languages become more standardized. It's not hearing people teaching deaf. That's not how it works. Yes, hearing teach in deaf schools, but really it's only in the deaf community that sign language is developed, a true full sign language. Did sign languages come from spoken languages or are they completely separate? So your question is, do sign languages follow spoken languages or are they separate? Which one? Oh, they're definitely separate. Real sign languages, not sign systems like signed English and such, but real sign languages, for example, ASL, BSL, Aslan, all of those, real sign languages are completely separate. Now, each of these sign languages have their own structure, their own grammar, but remember, fingerspelling, that's borrowed from spoken English. That's not really signs. Were there sign languages before deaf schools were founded? So your question is, before deaf schools were established, did they have sign languages? Yes, sign languages have always existed. Deaf schools, that's a recent thing. That's only in the last 300 years, probably? Now, understand, yes, deaf schools are where sign languages are taught and proliferated, but the invention, the concept of sign language was not created in deaf schools. How have sign languages evolved since their beginnings? So your question is, how do sign languages adapt and change over time? What does that look like? It happens exactly like spoken languages. So for example, Latin. Latin spread and over time it became Portuguese, Romanian, Spanish, Italian, all these different languages through the years. Signs do the same thing. Over time, the meanings, the shapes change and adapt over time. So for example, the word text. Back in the day, the sign for that was text like this. Why? It was related to the telephone wires and the TTY wires. I still sign that, to be honest, but now it's text like this, just like a phone, which makes sense. Before, the sign for computer was this. And I still see it today intermittently. Computer. Why? Those different reels in the old computers would turn like this. And now they sign it computer or computer like this. So a new concept requires a new sign. Technology and culture both have a large impact on sign languages today. Are all modern sign languages connected to one original sign language? So your question is, today there's tons of different sign languages. Did all of them originate with one original sign language? So that's a really good question. One sign language did not produce all the sign languages that we see today. But really, it depends. So some sign languages, yes, have originated from more older sign languages, such as Old French Sign Language. And that has resulted in ASL and a bunch of different African sign languages. Some sign languages develop on their own in isolated areas. For example, in Nepal, there is 3 deaf villages with their own sign languages. And the reason for that is Nepal is very mountainous, so the communities are very isolated, as you can see here. And each of these have a hereditary deafness, so they have a high incidence of deafness there. And because of the isolation, they don't interact a lot with each other, and so they kind of just interact in their small communities and develop their own sign languages there. So if you want to learn more about deaf villages, I highly recommend this series. I made 10 videos last year, and it was so fascinating. And my goal for this YouTube channel is to share information about these global sign languages all around the world. And if you want to show your support, You can by subscribing. Thank you so much. Do new sign languages get invented today? So your question is, are new sign languages still being invented today? Yes, absolutely. Still today. If you Google online looking for new sign languages, you will probably find the example of Nicaraguan Sign Language that was developed in the 1980s. And that's a good example. But the best example, in my opinion, is Protactile Sign Language. And that's a tactile language that the deafblind community developed and use. And that's only since, 2007, I think? They recognized that visual sign languages did not fit. They didn't work for them. They can't hear, they can't see. So a spoken language is just not a fit. A signed language, that makes no sense. So they decided to develop a sign language that is innate. Their innate language, and that's touch-based sign language. It's not visual, it's not auditory, it's touch. And honestly, it's so interesting that I really want to go off and tell you all about it right now, but just know it's super fascinating. And if you're thinking, how many years does it take to develop a sign language? Linguists say it takes less than 1 generation. That's it. So now you know, sign language wasn't created by one person. Deaf communities develop their own sign languages, and they're still developing sign languages today. So if you're really motivated now to learn a new sign language, you can with InterSign University. That's where deaf teachers from around the world teach you their sign languages. And it's so fascinating. And if you have any questions, comment below. Thank you so much.